Welcome to Seeking Alpha's CEO Interviews. Quality of leadership is a decisive factor in stock performance, so we provide in-depth interviews with the best and brightest CEOs in the public markets. We publish limited excerpts from our interviews on social media platforms and the full interviews at seekingalpha.com and in the highly rated Seeking Alpha mobile app. To find the full interviews, open seekingalpha.com or the Seeking Alpha mobile app and search for the phrase CEO Interviews, or simply type a stock ticker into the search box. Jonathan, welcome to CEO Interviews. Super happy to have you on talking AppHarvest. Welcome to Seeking Alpha.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I'm excited to talk to you about ag tech and vertical farming, and it's something that we've been talking about on the show recently. It's definitely in the news. People are interested about it, excited about it. But start from the beginning. Talk to viewers about what AppHarvest does, where it plays in the marketplace.
Yeah, so at AppHarvest, we're based in Central Appalachia, and we've set out to build some of the world's largest controlled environment agriculture facilities. And our thesis is, in our lifetime, most fruit and vegetable production at scale will be grown in a controlled environment. With climate disruption, with the need to use far less land and far less water when we grow our food, and to get the harsh chemical pesticides out, controlled environment agriculture solves for all of that. And really, we feel like we're in the first inning of the industry. My background was in the renewable energy industry, and we've tried to say this is the third wave of sustainable infrastructure. 20 years ago, it was renewable energy. 10 years ago, Tesla began to make electric vehicles popular in the mainstream, and then now you see Ford F-150 releasing their electric vehicle and everyone moving in that direction. And right now we're in the infancy of controlled environment agriculture and using technology and infrastructure to grow a lot more food with a lot less resources.
So talk to us about how you got involved. You said that you were involved with energy, some in Washington, kind of at a higher level. How did you decide? Well, talk to us about your journey there and how you decided to start AppHarvest.
Yeah, so I was in DC working on a White House initiative that was under the Obama administration, and it was to build large-scale solar on military installations. So my job as a private sector individual involved on that project was to evaluate technologies and figure out how we could build solar and wind on military installations without raising the cost of the energy cost for the U.S. Army. That background of large-scale sustainable project development in energy is what I've used to bring over to agriculture. And really, when you think about food, it's just another form of energy, except now we're powering the human body instead of putting electrons onto the grid. But ultimately, the company early on, we saw the opportunity that we've shifted most of our fruit and vegetable production out of the U.S. down to Mexico. One crop, for example, tomatoes, we imported nearly 4 billion pounds of tomatoes from Mexico to the U.S. Last year. And then now you look at California running out of water, plagued with wildfires, and there's a lot of disruption of that's already currently happening and putting pressure on our food system, and using technology and building infrastructure, solves for that. So here at AppHarvest, we're building large facilities. Our first one in Morehead, Kentucky, 2.8 million square feet, 60 acres under glass, which is nearly 50 football fields. We're growing tomatoes, and we're focused on growing that tomato using 90% less water. We get 30 times yield per acre than open field agriculture, and we don't use the harsh chemical pesticides. So again, for me, it's been an evolution of sustainable development from energy over to agriculture that brought me here to AppHarvest.
And I know you're from Kentucky. Was the focus on agriculture a way that you found it was a way to bring some kind of jobs back to Appalachia and that you could start a business there? Was that part of the focus, or did you feel like, for the reasons that you mentioned, food is something that we can tackle, is something that we can do better, and that's where you saw it? Was it a combination? Talk to us about kind of how you decided to hone in just there.
It was a little bit of all the above. This is not a passion project. And yes, I love the state I'm from, but what ended up happening and rolling out with all the team members and our investors is we just, for a lot of different reasons, we picked Eastern Kentucky. Mainly, it's water. So in the last decade in Kentucky, we've had 3 of our wettest years on state record. It's been our wettest decade on state record. 95% of a fruit and vegetable is water. So we've designed our systems to run completely on recycled rainwater. So not only do we use 90% less water than open field agriculture, we run completely on recycled rainwater. We collect that water, we filter it only with sand and UV and run our facilities. That's critical. As we're building large infrastructure, we can't pick that infrastructure up and move it. So we have to be in a region that's water rich, and this area, big check on that mark. And then access to markets. So if you look at the coal industry, West Virginia and Kentucky were 2 of the largest coal producing states in the U.S. They were in this region not only because there was the coal, but because they could get to 70% of the U.S. in a one-day drive. So we have the food production assets we're building. We have the water to run those, and we can get to 3/4 of the U.S. In a one-day drive, and the infrastructure is already there, the roads, and then the hardworking men and women of the region that powered this country through the Industrial Revolution. Again, we try to say coal did not power the U.S. alone. It's the men and women of Central Appalachia that really powered the U.S. over the last 100 years. We're a public benefit corporation and a B Corp. We are fully committed to working alongside the men and women in this region to build out a high-tech food sector. And there were all the various attributes. You put those together, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're headquartered here. And that's also why we've been able to bring in the likes of Jeff Ubben, who's on our board, but spent time with me on the ground. Martha Stewart, who joined our board, has been with me touring our facilities on the ground. There's a deep interest in how we got to landing in this region. But as you peel back the onion, there's multiple layers as to why we're here.
It was something that I was going to ask you about, the strength of your board. You mentioned 2 of them. Steve Case is also an early investor and on the board at AppHarvest. What do you think, the attraction initially? Was it what you're doing? Was it where you're doing it? Was it both? And also kind of what guidance are they giving you along the way? Because they've been with you, from the early days. Where are they guiding you in terms of moving forward?
Yeah, we've had a lot of people much smarter than myself around the table. That's for sure. I always feel like when I go into the board meeting, I'm on the intelligence level, like here, comparatively speaking. But no, they definitely help make us all smarter and stronger. But it was as you put the facts and data on the table, they speak for themselves. And I think for all of the different people, whether they invested their dollar, they invested their credibility, they invested their time. I mean, these are people that are devoting their careers towards this mission. And it's really been just data driven. I mean, so here's one of those points. When the UN Security Council visited us in Kentucky for the first time in our state history, we at AppHarvest had an opportunity to talk to them. The UN has said we need 70% more food by 2050. To get there, we would need 2 planet Earths to have enough land and water the way we currently farm. That's 30 years. That's not even 30 years away. And if you look at between now and 2050, humans have to grow more food to feed the growing population. We have to produce more food over the next 30 years than humans have produced in the last 10,000 years combined. These are just startling, jarring statistics that when you have problems this big, you layer on climate change on top of that, you start to realize there's no question if this industry is going to take off. It's a matter of when, how it's going to be solved, and who's going to solve it. And that's where, when everyone got involved, whether it's our board members or early investors, David Lee, who's been at Del Monte, he's been at Best Buy, Zynga, most notably, he was CFO and COO at Impossible Foods. We've had people betting their entire career on AppHarvest and joining and signing up with us. And a lot of that, we know we have to do the hard work. The hard work is execution at scale. That's very difficult. But right now we feel fortunate enough to where we know we've identified the problem. We know we have a solution for the problem. And now it's simply about execution at scale. And I think that's why we've been able to convince so many credible industry players from various backgrounds to sign up to join AppHarvest.
So talk to us about what the farm looks like, how it operates right now, and why you decided to start with tomatoes.
Well, tomatoes are the #1 import from Mexico on fruit and vegetables. So we went, again, there's a lot of complexity that goes into how we make the argument, but some of our, we try to look at decisions and make pretty simple, bold decisions. So let's bring tomato production back from Mexico to the US. That's a pretty easy, low-hanging target. So next year we'll be operating at least 5 facilities. Right now we're operating 1. And then by next year we'll have vine crops, berries, and leafy greens growing in all different types of facilities. But we're growing in a glass structure. And what we've tried to say, some people use the term greenhouse. I don't think that is very helpful, because think of like a 1950 sports car or a 2021 Tesla. The only 2 similarities between the two are they have 4 wheels and a steering wheel. Other than that, there's nothing in common. Same thing with what we're doing versus a 1950s greenhouse. We're a data-driven operation using industrial sensors and softwares to control the climate. AI and robotics, we purchased Root AI, LED lighting, one of the largest LED lighting installations in the world. We're using a glass structure because, again, we have to compete with dirty open field agriculture being imported from other countries. And in order to do that, yes, to be sustainable, you need to harness nature for what it's good at, but also its resiliency and keeps our costs lower. So we only turn on the LED light when we're not getting enough micromole light from the sun. So we use all the sun that we possibly can, then we turn on our LED lights. On our roof, we collect the rainwater and store that in a retention pond. Again, sunlight and rainwater to grow a plant, those are critical basic elements that you need to grow a plant. We're utilizing nature first, then layering technology on top of that. And for us, it's not only sustainability, it ultimately, big picture, long-term, allows us to be cost competitive with other players growing a fruit and vegetable.
And then in terms of the human labor force, because as you mentioned, working with robotics, working with AI, how does the labor structure work? Do you have data scientists working on that? Do you have agriculture, people coming from the agricultural field? How does that work in terms of the labor structure?
We have a very wide range variety of employees at AppHarvest. And, we try to use the phrase diversity of thought and really bring everybody together. And that's where it's a bit of a melting pot right now. So yes, we have, people on computer science and hard engineering who are working on the robotics. We have, people with more of a plant science background or tactical agricultural background to grow the plants. And we have our entry-level workforce who, still is making a living wage. We pay full healthcare benefits. And for me, the exciting piece is, the upskilling opportunity of our entry-level team. There's no colleges in the US that are really preparing people for what farming is today and what it's going to be 10 and 20 years from now. We've tried to say, again, the last great technological revolution in American farming is when the tractor was introduced. And that's still what large agriculture colleges are teaching. We're teaching our employees how to use iPhones and iPads to operate software and use industrial sensors to operate robotics and use LED lights. So our workforce is really a bit of a training ground as well as we scale our team. We're at about 550 employees right now. We'll be at roughly 1,000 employees this time next year. And as we scale that team, out of real self-preservation, we need to be developing talent internally And we see that as a huge opportunity for us to not only retain employees, but recruit employees. We've had nearly 8,000 people apply to work at AppHarvest this year. Number might be up to 10,000 now. And again, in this time where you read in the news about labor shortages, you read in the news about people having issues of people showing up to work. We hired 500 employees in the middle of COVID, and they're showing up every day. And part of that is, yes, we're mission driven and people want to be here, but people see a succession plan that as the company grows, they're growing with it. And last thing I would say on this is we've already invested nearly $500,000 into high school education in Eastern Kentucky. And that is solely because we need to be developing talent in this region. As we build these massive facilities, we couldn't wait on federal and state governments to change curriculum at high school. So we're just putting technologies at high schools. We're teaching young people how to grow. Maybe some of those people will come work with us. Maybe they'll go, start their own companies, but we're just putting technologies in schools here because as we move and scale so rapidly, it's critical we have that workforce with us. And again, I'm not sure what we're doing is possible in many areas in the U.S. The ability to adapt and move quickly at these high schools and community colleges, it would take years to get permits to try to do this in Washington, D.C. or New York City, and we're able to do it in a matter of weeks.
That's really awesome. It's interesting in the times that we're living in, these disruptive industries, ag tech, crypto, blockchain, cannabis. It's these industries that you can't have gone to school for because they didn't exist when you were going to school. And so it's really exactly as you're saying, learning on the job, and the fact that you're giving back to that community is, that's really awesome. What kind of response has the community there given to you, and what kind of adoption in terms of taking advantage of that have you seen?
The ROI on that dollar is through the roof. And again, I think there's 4 publicly traded companies that are both a public benefit corporation and a B Corp. And that means we don't just have fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, but broader stakeholders that align with our mission. That ROI on that dollar, there's people that pay more money on that on lobbying dinners in DC. We don't go to those dinners, but I pick up the phone and can call, we can get to many senators. We've had, conversations with both sides of the party, political spectrum at the highest level of parties. The ROI on that investment, mayors want to work with us, city council people, superintendents. But to your point and what you say on rapidly changing industries, I'm one of those people. And that's why, I believe in it so much that if we can help unlock the talent in the region, keep our best and brightest here instead of the best and brightest only going to Boston and San Francisco. I was a product of public schools in this area. So, unleashing that talent and challenging some of the educational models here. But again, the willingness for our school systems to have worked with us, it's really hard to put into a financial model or an Excel file. When you have entire school systems getting behind an industry, it's really hard to quantify that. But again, we're making super long-term bets. I've tried to say, I just did my first quarterly earnings call. This is not a company, if you want to be looking at our stock price every day. Some people are going to do that, and that's fine. But to me, I'm the CEO who's judging this company on our first decade, our second decade, and our third decade. We're making investments that we won't really see for about 8 to 10 years. And that unleash that bubble we're seeing around communities here, we're not going to get that ROI true capture for 8 or 10 years from now. But being a public benefit corporation right now is a very small segment of the public markets. Hopefully we all get there, because CEOs are not doing justice to their shareholders if they're head down in the sand and all they're trying to do is optimize for short-term profitability in quarterly earning calls. That's selfish. It's selfish for the management teams. It's selfish for the executives. It is hard work to hit your short-term targets and have long-term plans also in place. And hopefully all CEOs and all the management teams at every publicly traded company is going to not only do the obvious job, which you have to deliver on your short-term promises, but do the hard-term job of thinking, what are you going to do to make sure your company's even relevant and not bankrupt in a decade or 2 decades? And for people that wonder how quickly industries can shift, I'm sitting in the middle of coal country, where virtually every coal company that was thriving 10 years ago is bankrupt today. And again, how do we get long-term big picture planning? Part of that is through ESG, environmental, social governance, and not just being overly short-term sighted and sacrificing long-term institutional success over short-term gains.
So, I mean, it's a really great point, and I think speaks to the volatility that's happening, right now in the marketplace, also specifically with AppHarvest. And to your point, in terms of, looking at long-term and going about it in the right way, even if it's sacrificing some short-term profitability, what are the goals in terms of, because as you mentioned, going on that ESG angle, it's obviously more expensive, to be working that way is obviously more cost intensive, capital intensive. How do you go about working through that and getting to a place of profitability, down the line?
Well, ESG does not need to be a trade-off. And so there needs to be cost savings, and then there's investments that are more long-term. So an example of that, us using 100% recycled rainwater and having no agricultural runoff solves for the biggest issues in agriculture. We use 90% less water, we use all rainwater, and we have no agricultural runoff. High marks on ESG, but extremely resilient in long-term cost savings. Right now, we treat our water like it's just free and abundant and always will be. The one reason we're on planet Earth and we're not on any other planet in the known universe is water. And when water prices continue to rise, as they will, as climate change makes fresh water more scarce, as we deplete our water resources, as we poison our waters with harsh chemicals, that water cost will go up. And we're not subject to that because we run on free recycled rainwater. So it's also, ESG is not a trade-off between profitability. ESG can drive cost savings, but then like investing in education, that is an investment, and that ROI we won't see for years down the line. And that's something, we justify with our board and with our management team. And we decide, is this something we want to lean into? Do we think, it's going to drive our company over the next decade? And those are decisions we have to make. But, as we enter this world where ESG is becoming a stronger and stronger focus, it's really important that we frame the conversation. It's not profitability or ESG. ESG should be driving profitability. And if it's not, you're just investing in the wrong company.
And do you feel like when you went to market via SPAC, that was something that that specific route helped you in terms of getting the capital on board and becoming a public company? Was that kind of, the thought process in terms of coming to market now and in that way?
So the SPAC was just a vehicle. And at the time, it was the most attractive vehicle we could use. We were building a company, an organization that wanted to have trust and transparency with the public, and not only with our consumers, but with our investors. And part of Jeff Ubben joining the board so early and being very, very close with me and helping try to build the company, we knew we wanted to take this company public. We didn't know when, and we were head down on building. But when the SPAC vehicle became a window for us, we evaluated it. We could have raised money on balance sheet privately. We could have potentially tried to go another route for a public listing. But at the time, it was the best way for us to go public. And with us, a vast majority of the capital we raised was in our pipe. So you look at some SPAC transactions, they call them a blank check. That was far from us. About 3/4 of our fundraise came through a roadshow, and our largest investor was Fidelity. Our second largest investor is a long holder that plans to hold this stock for a very long time. And we canceled our roadshow after 22 meetings because 18 of the 22 investors committed into our pipe. We'd already oversubscribed. So for us, we've tried to say not all SPAC deals are equal, not all SPAC transactions are equal, but for us at the time, it was the most efficient vehicle to get to the public markets, and I do think we made the right decision.
And as you mentioned, I mean, you spoke about the stock price and not looking at daily fluctuations or weekly fluctuations and holding it for the long term. Is that something that, you know, as CEO of a publicly traded company, that you feel like it trips you up at all? Is it something that the board is talking about, or is everybody of the opinion, heads down, this is the goal, we're not worried about, kind of, or is it something that you're needing to talk to investors about along the way? Is that something that you're dealing with?
Um, we know what we're building, and there is no even mostly zero conversation on it. We're head down building a company. I was trying to get to this call here because I woke up in the morning. I slept in the RV on the farm, and that's how committed we are to building stuff. This team is motivated by seeing facilities go up, hiring people, developing talent, and running operations. And if the stock goes lower, then probably a better time to buy, I would assume. I can't, speak for, buying and selling in the public markets. Actually, AppHarvest is the first stock I've ever owned. I've not typically been a huge fan of Wall Street, but the reality is, even AppHarvest and the institution we're building is we have to figure out how to use the public markets, and private sector capital and private sector companies have to be a part of the solution. And so for so long, we just demonize the public markets, or we demonize private companies. That's not the right way to go about it. Right? In order to actually have change at scale, we have to have companies, making that change. And obviously, no one's done it better, really, in I think our life than probably Tesla. I mean, single-handedly, Tesla has dragged every major automotive company in the world to rapidly move into electric vehicles. That was a private company on the public markets using the systems in place to have impact at scale. And that mentality, I definitely think many people here at this team, we're in this place where there are those test cases in the public markets that we can look to. And our team is simply motivated by impact at scale. We know if we do half of what we're talking about, 10, 20 years from now, we'll be one of the larger food and agriculture companies, not only in the U.S. but globally. So we're head down building. But it is something that it's a new world for us being in the public markets, but we're only a couple months into it. So maybe this time next year I can tell you more what it's like being a public CEO.
I was going to say, so far, is it kind of, having had an aversion to Wall Street, is it similar to what you were expecting?
Well, I've been very fortunate because COVID's terrible. In no way is it good. But the one thing for me personally is I've been only in Kentucky. I haven't left. So I've been able to do what I love the most, which is sleep on the farm, start construction at 3 and 4 in the morning, go into our operations. And I did not have to go to New York. So I didn't go to the New York for a road show. And I intentionally did not go to New York when we rang the bell. I stayed inside of our facility, and we virtually rang the bell with our employees. And so, for me, our company has really been shielded and been able to stay head down. And our board has been very supportive of that. Everybody from, Martha, who's been a very good mentor to me as an entrepreneur, but Jeff Ubben and others are saying, Jonathan, team, head down, focus on building. Let's just focus on results and do not worry about Wall Street. But it's also having the right investors in having investors with conviction and actually want to be in this for the long term. And many of our pipe investors, as we went on that road show, I got the questions of, well, if you're so committed to ESG, I don't care about that. I care about making money. What is ESG going to do for me? And my take is, well, just go invest in another cigarette company or something. I mean, it's so short-term sighted for investors to think ESG or profitability. And, right now the food and agriculture system, it's on the verge of where the energy industry in the US was 20 years ago. It's on the verge of where the cigarette industry was 30 years ago. I mean, there's stuff that we sell in our grocery store today that we will look back on in 30 years and go, I cannot believe we let a 5-year-old kid watch that commercial and put that stuff in their body. It should be illegal. And regulators are pushing back, consumers are pushing back, and investors that don't have that long-term outlook, it's pretty scary. They probably shouldn't be handling people's money, but they are, and they're not the right investors for us. But the good thing is, I think Wall Street's changing, and I think the investor sentiment's changing, and I think there is a culture shift in what is a company's obligation. So we're just head down doing what we have to do, but it's certainly interesting seeing how things are swirling in the public markets, and how Wall Street is slowly shifting from its ways in the 1980s to early 90s to what we're doing here in 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another industry that's being disruptive and that's being disrupted. And even the term ESG, I think the fact that it even exists in investing lexicon is proof of that. That people are concerned, are thinking about different things other than, and not just other than the bottom line, because as you said, it impacts the bottom line in this developing, evolving reality that we're living in. Something that I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about developing employees and developing talent in Kentucky. A huge space that's in Kentucky is the hemp cannabis space. Is there any thought, you talked about what you're going to be growing after tomatoes, any thought to taking on cannabis, or is that a totally different beast?
Fruit and vegetable company. Our global food problem is big enough for this company to try to tackle in my lifetime. And the next 30 years of my work is solely going to be on food security and building global food assets. And that is more than a 30-year challenge. And we are head down focused on growing good, healthy fruits and vegetables in a controlled environment using less water, less land. And we're going to stay zero focused on food and building a food company consumers can trust.
Okay, so talk to me about like the next few years. You've acquired these robotics, these AI companies to help develop the data side of things and the push forward. Where do you see it growing? Are you going to expand past Kentucky? How do you see it evolving?
Well, we're head down on building out our headquarter and network of farms here in Central Appalachia. But it's being in the largest economy in the world and being in the largest agriculture economy in the world. When you're on track to be one of the larger food and ag companies in that economy, the world watches. And we've already had conversations with dignitaries and leaders all around the world. And if you look at what our solution solves for, we want to keep head down and build out the network of assets here. But we're very cognizant of what's happening in the world right now. You look at China and India, account for nearly 40% of the world's population, have less than 10% of the world's fresh water. They have to figure out how to grow a lot more food with a lot less resources. Our application solves for that. The Middle East, most countries in the Middle East import nearly all of their fruits and vegetables. Again, not sustainable. Africa continues to have issues with food security. So this is an application that certainly is global. But for us to achieve global scale, we need to do one thing first, and that's stay head down, build some of the largest assets in the world here, and then we'll certainly be looking and having those conversations in the years ahead as we develop and grow our team here in Central Appalachia.
You mentioned that's one of the pieces of advice you've gotten as an entrepreneur, to keep focus and keep your head down. Are there other pieces that you've gotten that you feel like have really resonated with you?
It's not nearly as pretty as it looks like on the internet. So yeah, it's, some entrepreneurs and a lot of companies, and I think people have this mindset of what they think an innovative, disruptive company is going to look like, and then you go do it. And you have to build a culture where best idea wins, leave your ego at the door, and a nonstop all around the clock, 7 days a week, answer every problem. It doesn't matter how big the problem is. We're going to sit the problem on the table and figure out how we're going to get to an answer. And it's a mindset, and it's a culture. And to me, that's probably the most valuable thing in any innovative or disruptive company is having that culture and mindset that no problem is too big to solve, and everybody is important in trying to solve that problem. So we've been able to slowly build that here at AppHarvest, and I'm incredibly proud of our team. I mean, an example of this is we built one of the world's largest facilities in the middle of a global pandemic. We were on time, on budget. Were we terrified? Yes. We were waking up at 3 a.m. trying to figure out were the ships coming in across from Europe. Were trains running our product to get them to the farm for construction, but no one panicked. It was a slow, diligent process every day. Then we hired 500 people in the middle of a global pandemic to stand up one of the world's largest facilities. I couldn't be more proud of our team. It's a mindset, it's a culture that again, work together to solve these problems. But as any good entrepreneur, if you do one thing right, it's creating that culture, and that's arguably the most valuable thing at any company.
And you mentioned, the issues internationally and how much this technology can fit into the international picture. Is that something that you've already started talking about in those regions? Is that something that there's a lot of reception around already?
I am an individual that grew up in Kentucky, went to public schools, graduated from our public university, the University of Kentucky, and I continue to be shocked at the people I've been talking to. When the UN Security Council first visited, that was one foray into it, but prime ministers and dignitaries from all around the world who I've been on the phone with and have expressed interest in our work continues to be humbling. But for us, it really ratchets up the table stakes and ratchets up the intensity. It's actual urgency that we hear on the other side of the phone. Our governor, for example, when COVID first hit, our governor brought us in because he was concerned whether or not we would have fresh food on our grocery store shelves. And he said they had created a plan to helivac the governor to safety in the event that we couldn't get food on our store shelves. That's a scary place to be in the world when you realize you're at the center of food security and you see how vulnerable and how unstable our food system is. So for us, it's exciting, but it's motivating and humbling. And we know we have to keep our head down and again, just execute on what we're doing. But the table stakes are real. I mean, we have massive vulnerabilities in our food system. COVID highlighted that and highlighted the cracks, and the time is ticking. I mean, we know what the projections are over the next 10, 20, 30 years as we get a rising middle class, as we get a higher population, as climate disruption makes it harder to grow food outdoors, as pest and disease continue to ratchet up. It's real. And so for our team, we take these phone calls and we get excited by the discussions, but then we come back into kind of base camp, so to speak, and really go, that's even more urgency around why we need to solve these problems. They're real, and we know we need to be a part of the solution.
And do you feel like the most important thing in terms of developing and harnessing that passion is hiring people that are passionate about this topic? Or do you feel like having strategies in place and then bringing in talented people, it automatically creates that kind of interest and passion and attachment to this?
Well, the good thing is we have our strategy and we haven't pivoted off of it even just in the slightest. I mean, we know what we need to do and we're right down the middle on it. And now it is finding the right people. And again, you can be a very talented person, but you mentioned it earlier on this. The world is moving so quickly and so fast. Whatever we learned 15 years ago is nearly irrelevant. So, and that's the opportunity, which is, a high school kid in Harlan, Kentucky has access to the same information on their iPhone that a kid in Singapore, Hong Kong, London, or San Francisco does. So for us, it's more about finding the problem solver mentality that's willing to get to any solution. And that's hard, but that for us is the most critical piece as we're building out our team.
So I guess my last question to you before we go is, do you think that there's anything that investors are overlooking about AppHarvest or aren't thinking about, or something that you feel like is something that investors should know about AppHarvest? I'm happy for you to share that, or something that you'd like to share with viewers.
This is going to take a lot of work from a lot of different stakeholders in order to truly build a resilient food system for our kids and next generation. And we had analysts from banks come in and tour some of our facilities. And I was saying the same thing to them, which is this is going to be a team effort where we need not only researchers and institutions on the education side, but we need analysts at banks and investors, everyone looking at what is that 30-year plan? Because right now it doesn't exist. There's no central government that has it. There's no non-governmental organization that has it. There's no companies saying, here's the 30-year plan of what assets we're going to build in order to ensure we have a stable food production system in 30 years from now. And so we all need to get smart. And that's the opportunity, is that, the more intelligent these conversations become, the quicker we're going to get to solutions. It's going to take investors, it's going to take operators, technologists, and researchers, really all working together to move the agriculture industry forward. But thank you again for the time, and it's conversations like this that'll continue to highlight the industry as a whole.
I appreciate it, Jonathan. And we mentioned that you're new to the market, so I'm happy to catch up with you as things develop and evolve. Super interesting conversation, super interesting topics, I think. So thank you so much for sharing your insight and your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.